tell us for our listeners how this all started. You know, this was you were a young man. You worked hard. We talked about your childhood. It was rough. You made some bad decisions, but not decisions that should have landed you in prison for the rest of your life. How did this happen? How did a man, who had a pretty good trajectory on what your life was going to be, end up in prison, waking up every day knowing you're innocent? How did this happen?
Oh, well, first, let me just thank you, Eric and Mandy, for having me on this morning. It's an honor to be a part of this interview, this podcast, Cover Justice. With most of us who grew up in inner city, it's a tough neighborhood. I grew up in the west side of St. Louis. Gangs, drugs, violence, you name it. I don't want to, make this sound like it's stereotypical. However, when you're born in my community as a young African-American male, it always seemed like it's a target on your back. And I grew up with a large family. I had 6 brothers and 2 sisters. My grandmother had 9 children, 7 girls and 2 boys. So I had a bunch of cousins. So that in itself says we're ripe for gang activities, or at least a clan of young men and girls who will be considered troublemakers in the community. There are a lot of large families in the community, but we were not. Most of my siblings and relatives, I was doing the right thing, and some of us kind of went astray. I went astray as a young man and got into some juvenile delinquency trouble, and ended up in a juvenile detention center, and then also was convicted of a burglary, which I committed. Ended up going to reform school. And so when you get that kind of track record, you pretty much, you've set yourself up to be accused of something that you didn't do at some point. And that's something that I try to tell young people. Try to stay out of trouble as best as you can, because there'll come a time when you really haven't gotten into any trouble and you still can be accused. And that's what happened with me.
So what happened? How did it lead from these episodic crimes to the ultimate crime of, you're now accused and charged of murder, and you're heading down a railway towards a jury that's going to convict you?
Yeah, well, it started out in St. Louis. One night, a gentleman was pumping gas into an automobile, and a man ran up on him and shot him. And several people described the person that night as someone who was short, medium to light skinned. Now, I'm not 7 feet tall, but you can look at me.
Sure.
It makes you smile, because when I say this, every time I speak, and I speak around the country and other countries, they say, well, man, you're not light-skinned. Even John Grisham, poked fun at me one time. I was sharing this story, and he looked at me and said, my friend, I'm telling you, I'm light-skinned, Darryl. You don't even come close. And this is from the famous author John Grisham, who I've met several times. A great guy. In fact, the picture of him is in my book, him and a picture with Brian Denny and him. But at any rate, there was no motive, no ballistics, no DNA, no confession, weapon, fingerprint, nothing connected me to the crime, with one exception. And it's sad to say, but the prosecutors can go into the jailhouse and they can make deals with guys who are facing charges themselves. And that's what got me convicted. They made deals with these jailhouse snitch witnesses.
Snitches.
Yeah, snitches. Right. And they came to court, raised their hand, and lied after giving an oath. So that was the prelude to my introduction into the real prison system.
Well, tell us about your lawyer. I mean, tell us about, did you have a lawyer that believed in you? Did you have a lawyer who was trying to force a plea down your throat, and you're trying to tell him, look, I am innocent. There is zero direct evidence. Like you said, no blood, no fingerprints, no DNA. The only thing is a description that I don't look like. And now we have somebody who comes in from the jail who has everything to gain by giving false testimony against you. What was the type of lawyer you had? Were you able to afford a good lawyer, or was it a public defender?
Yes, I had a public defender, unfortunately, who I saw one time for 1 hour.
Wow. Oh, my God.
That was it. And I'm facing capital murder. This was a capital murder charge. Well, I was facing capital punishment. I could have been sentenced to death. And I told this lawyer that I was in the state of Washington, and with my friend, my best friend. And he was, he was not what you call an ideal citizen at the time. He was a drug kingpin. But I was a new dad, just had a child, and I was trying to get with him to get me some connections to drugs so I could make some money to take care of my little girl, which was not a good choice either. But this lawyer who I saw one time didn't go and get the airline tickets, didn't go and interview him, and just basically said, Darryl, we don't have to prove anything. The state has to prove this case against you. and that sounds good in theory, but that's not how it works.